The approach Debbie has described is very similar to how we support people at Live Work Play, and I'm sure quite familiar to most, if not all of you tuning in here today. But the phrase just enough support has been mentioned a couple of times already today, and I just wanted to talk about that a bit. It is a concept that we have embraced at Live Work Play and have kind of taken it a bit further in terms of developing our own principles to explain how the concept functions in day-to-day operations and in support of individuals. So you'll hear a lot about person-directed, which is really appropriate and an important conversation in our sector. And for us, that's reflected in the principle known as honoring personal autonomy. And that's really deliberate there on the poster, that is the basis around which everything else operates. And really what we're saying there is just putting the person at the heart of their own decision-making and their own experience of daily life. So it's far beyond a plan that the person's been involved in, and then we just reference back to the plan all the time. You know, what's in the plan? Well, it's a person-directed plan, and therefore if we're following the plan, we're doing our jobs appropriately. The honoring personal autonomy principle calls us to continuously reflect on the support we're providing and how it is supporting the autonomy of that person to make decisions, including changes to something that might already be on a piece of paper, or that maybe we even talked about it yesterday and they feel differently today. And Tim there with the folded arms is a great example of someone who's been supported always with his parents with respect to personal autonomy, and we're doing our best to carry that forward as primary supports in Tim's life. And a good example of that was when I really wanted a photo for the poster, and Tim said he would volunteer for that. And when the photographer arrived and Tim was wearing his purple gardening clogs, it was suggested perhaps he would change his footwear. And Tim said, you can either have the picture with the footwear or not have the picture. So well done, Tim, in living the principle. And person-centered thinking is obviously closely tied to the central principle of honoring personal autonomy. And it's really just another reminder that whether it's families, individuals we support, our own staff, members of the community, to really work hard at looking at the perspective of those other persons and make sure that's included in our thinking. Of course, we have all kinds of pressures, pushes, and pulls, internal and external, that influence our decisions. But really putting the people we support at the heart of our thinking at all times. Always building bridges. This is a great reminder about not replacing natural relationships in community. So how do we always think of ourselves as connectors and not replacements? Because we don't want to, literally reduce the relationships in a person's life by replacing them, or really, hold back people from developing new relationships by not supporting them to meet new people in community venues and build new relationships. Assets-based solutions, I think that's obvious and probably relevant to all of your work. I'm sure you're always thinking about what the person has to offer and how to bring their gifts and talents to bear to the benefit of the community and others around them. But a lot of our assessment processes and a lot of the paperwork and the planning in our sector is still very focused on deficits. It's a complaint we hear about often from individuals and their families, and so really focusing on assets, and that's been a huge help in our employment supports, which we'll be talking about later. Authentic valued roles, that's just a reminder that similar to not replacing relationships, not replacing roles, not making up roles like within our agency to replace authentic and genuine valued roles in the community. So, whether it's friend, coworker, teammate, how can we make sure that those are authentic experiences, reciprocal with others in the community, and in genuine venues that are shared by all citizens. And that leads me to the community first solutions. So I often tell kind of a long story about 15 years ago when we still had our congregate programs. And of course, as all of you know, fitness and health are always two things that people want in a day program. And so we were attempting to do all that with the various cooking and kitchen activities. And also, we ended up raising a bunch of money and effectively built our own gym right within the agency in the day program. And of course, years later, we reflect on that and we go, what were we doing? People were getting on a bus for a long trip and going past several gyms on their way to the day program so they could exercise with the same people every day forever. And so that's a picture there of Jillian at the local YMCA. There's a real community hub at the YMCA in downtown Ottawa, as I'm sure is common in most of them. And basically in everything we do, what is the community first solution? And if that community is not ready or needs help to supporting people, what can we do to change that rather than create some kind of parallel structure in agency land? And last but not least, barrier busting tech. So there has been rapid development in the last few years, and I know many of you have done great work in experimenting and implementing technological solutions. Things like coded locks for people that had trouble looking after a key. A small thing, but life-changing, right? So if the barrier or a barrier to having your own home was, security issues, we can solve a lot of those now with coded locks, video, apps. There's an endless number of solutions, but also, use of voice systems, Alexa and Google Voice, and how that has allowed us to get out of the face of people for things that really it wasn't necessary that we would be in their space. So it could be things like reminders about medications or leaving for appointments or work. And you can use those devices as two-way communications as well. And so we've implemented that with some people that don't like other technology, but they're okay with that. And it's always about what works for that person, what technology they prefer and how they want to use it, and making sure they're in control. So that is just a real quick tour of the live work play version of just enough support and the principles. And really in the end, the whole concept is based in the neuroscience that shows that over supporting a person is just as damaging as under supporting a person. I think we don't talk about that enough in our sector. And if you'd like to know more about it, please visit the YouTube channel.